can't say that I've been on a podcast before. I've done web series, I've done videos, but never podcasts. So,
okay. Do you consume a lot of podcasts?
Not a lot of podcasts, but a lot of radio. So, similar public radio.
Listening to the radio in the car.
Yeah, a lot of like NPR, Fresh Air, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Things that they turn into podcasts later. And
they kind of Okay. I don't very much listen to the radio, but I do find myself listening to WHYY's Fresh Air with Terry Gross a lot. Any recent episodes of Fresh Air that have stuck with you?
Yeah, this morning there was on my drive over here, there was one on the state of public education, specifically like K through 12 education, and basically they were arguing that we've been doing it wrong for all this time, and there's many new theories on how we should be doing it better. It was fascinating.
I mean, I probably wouldn't have listened to that one, but I usually tend to gravitate towards the like the artsy kind of entertainers, like if they had like a director of some big film that's coming out or something like that, or like writers, or I think I distinctly remember like an episode with Bruce Springsteen or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have some great interviews with different artists. I remember right after Leonard Cohen died, they had his son as the interviewee, and it was really fascinating to like hear about his life from the perspective of his son. Or
what was I think my favorite one in recent memory was with Mark Maron.
Okay, yeah.
Mark Maron. He's a comedian and podcaster, and it was a live recording of him and Terry Gross. I think they used the opportunity to like turn it into record an episode for his show, an episode for Fresh Air. So it was like a twofer. Or it might have been the same recording. I can't remember for sure, but it was, I think, an abridged, or not exactly abridged, but like pared down version that appeared on Fresh Air, and then the like extended kind of uncensored version that was released as an episode of WTF with Mark Maron.
Yeah.
And where he interviewed Terry Gross.
Yeah.
So. And I have to say it was fun because there was just one moment where Mark was like, he mentioned a time when he was on Fresh Air, and like it's a rare occurrence and one to be celebrated when the guest can make Terry Gross laugh.
Yeah.
Or he made her snort laugh. He was like, I win. I did it.
Yeah. Well, if ever there was an opportunity to start my own podcast, then while we've got this set up, this would be the time.
What would your idea be? What would your podcast be?
Oh man, I haven't thought about this. I've never sat in front of a microphone before, so the first couple episodes would probably just be me rambling.
It'd be like Bill Burr's Monday morning podcast. Do you know who he is? Bill Burr?
I know Bill Burr. I haven't heard his podcast. Yeah.
It's exactly what you think it would be. It's just him like ranting for a couple of hours, and then maybe every once in a blue moon he might have a guest or something.
Yeah.
And I guess he just loves like being angry at the world for 3 hours at a time. So I think he started doing another edition during the week called that releases on Thursdays. So it was called the Monday Morning Podcast on Thursdays or something. Yeah. But if you did want to start really start a podcast, what do you think? What's an area of interest you'd think you'd be able to dive deep enough to like have regular content, a regular show about?
Probably the arts in general. I'm really interested in a bunch of different mediums, from literature to visual art to like graphic design, printmaking, animation, filmmaking. So I would probably discuss, whatever I'm interested at the moment, which
could be anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's kind of how I do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you've visited the show page or listened to any episodes yet, but, the title is The Podcast. Benson tie because I wanted to keep this format so amorphous that I could pretty much do anything I want with it.
Yeah.
Although I guess at the moment, what it tends to be is just me, like, it's like a one-on-one interview versation with people.
Yeah. But, it's still young. You can take it anywhere, too.
Yeah. Even, I podcasted a professor of mine recently who we got into this conversation about pickles.
Okay.
And then at some point he had suggested, like, what if you turn this into a pickle-themed podcast?
The Picklecast?
Or just the Pickles podcast. Or something like that. Yeah. And we even got into a whole thing about, well, first of all, I did give like a minute's worth of sincere thought about what if I really did start a podcast about pickles. But I think what he was trying to get at was, what if you turn this podcast into pickle themed? I'm like, well, that's a lot of work I don't want to have to do.
Well, it's a very niche audience too. I mean, I'm sure you'd have an audience. There are some people who love pickles.
Yeah.
I recently went into like an Amazon black hole. Have you ever done that where you click on like the products related to this and you're just like, why is this a thing? And you just keep going deeper and deeper into that well.
Yeah.
And I found T-shirts that are like pickle all day, every day, and there's a big pickling community apparently. So,
and then at some point you found the Pickle Rick game that's from the Pickle Rick television series.
I didn't find that, but that doesn't surprise me that that's a thing. Yeah,
because I have one, and I haven't played it yet. Yeah. But it's just I don't know, it's something to marvel at. Like, I have this rather large replica of Rick Sanchez's form as a pickle.
Yep. And
then you break it open, and there's like the whole game inside with cards and like sheets of whatever. I haven't played it yet because, frankly, I haven't found the time or desire to, but it's just like, hey, look, I have a huge pickle here.
Yeah. Well, let me know how it is when you play it. Is it worth the price of admission? Or?
I don't know. It was a gift, but
okay. So then probably, just if not, if only for like the fact that it's a conversation piece.
It probably would be if I had like more people over, or if it was kept not kept in the corner in a bag.
Hey, I haven't even seen it and we're talking about it already, so.
I got into, like, if I were to turn this into a pickle themed podcast, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather start a whole new podcast.
Yeah.
Because, it'd be a lot of changing my artwork or the title of the show, or a lot of like modifications to the podcast in its current state, just for the joke of it being pickle themed.
I mean, why not just have like spin-off podcasts? You can have your pickle podcast.
Yeah, I'll start my own podcast network.
Yeah.
About with the first non-flagship show being the pickle themed podcast that I would create.
Media mogul over here.
I mean, if you saw my website, it's I guess it is titled like after the podcast, but it's also like in a kind of by proxy my website, as in like about me. Like there's top shelf thing is the podcast, but then there's other parts showcasing like my identity as a filmmaker or musician and stuff I've done in those fields, and just like a part of the page about myself.
Yeah, that's nice. You can send it to people and give them like a good feel of like you're not a man of one talent, you've got a man of many talents.
Yeah. And also it will let them know I'm legit.
Yeah,
like I remember back in the summer when I was doing this, but I hadn't officially launched the podcast yet. You could feel like when I was reaching out to people, it's like, oh, sure, I'd love to know more about it. Can you show me like a link to your, or something? Like, well, it hasn't been launched yet.
Yeah.
So, sure, it may seem weird if I'm trying to reach out to you to do a podcast and like you don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah.
But it's not. But it's still like, are you just trying to lure me into your home so you can like kill me or something? What kind of elaborate ploy involves like creating putting forth the idea of a podcast, like, would you like to come on? And then possibly die. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's always the ploys that seem like, why would someone come up with this that are probably the most dangerous?
Although thankfully I have. In fact, I built my website in like a day before I actually launched a podcast, just because it finally occurred to me, like, I should have a website, right?
Yeah.
So I like hopped onto WordPress and just threw some blocks together so I can finally have something to send to people, so that I can like have the links for people to follow to like where it is on various platforms, and also make it seem legit.
Yeah, I have a website, and I sometimes forget I have a website. So like, it was very strange when I was doing job interviews, and like I'd meet people I don't know, and they'd ask me questions about projects that I'd worked on. I was like, "How do you know about this?" And they're like, "Oh, I found this on your website." Oh, yeah.
Wait, I have a website? Yeah. I forgot I had a website. I visited your website a couple of times, and I noticed there could be things that are out of date. And it looks rather sparse, perhaps because you've produced more content since like the last time you updated your site.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it's been a while. That's on the to-do list now that I've finally moved and gotten settled in. But it wasn't first priority at the moment.
Yeah, and I would have expected like you listing, "Oh, now I'm a visiting professor of film at the University of Hartford." I'm like, it just still says he lives in Boulder.
Yeah. It's a little out of date. I'm sorry if anyone's checked my website. And
do you keep up with your stats? Check the analytics?
No, I'm actually not even like social media. I never had a Twitter. I'm so far behind the times. I have an Instagram that I post to twice a year.
For which occasions?
I usually travel twice a year. Usually during the fall break or the winter break, and during the summer break, I'm usually working on some sort of film project. So that's my way of like letting people know I'm still alive while I'm abroad.
I have an Instagram. I haven't updated it in maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Just at first when I got into it, I was kind of invested in it. But then at some point, I felt like I'm doing this too much. I'm paying too much attention to this. I didn't want to be the kind of person who's like completely enveloped by their social media handles and the portals into this weird digital space where I'm trying to live out a life that's not really real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I was like, I'll let go of this. Like I'll delete the app off my phone. And then I have it now. I reinstalled it, but again, I haven't posted anything since like maybe 2014, 2015. And I'm just like, I don't feel the need to.
Yeah. I deleted Facebook off my phone about 6 months ago, and I realized recently, like, I haven't checked it. I check it like maybe once a month on the computer since then, and I haven't posted anything since I deleted it off the phone. It's amazing what a big difference it makes just not having that like constant like notification every day.
Yeah.
To check the app. You become less engaged with it. So they know what they're doing, but
they do. Like I set up a page for my podcast, and then literally every day there's a notification of like, oh, you have someone liked your page. Sure, that. I understand that, but every freaking day is like, hey, spend $30 to boost your page, advertise it, promote it to literally everyone on Facebook.
Yeah, anyway, they can promote to you to get you to give them your credit card number. And
Thankfully, I haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
but I mean, they were tempting me by giving me a $15 credit for whatever promotion they were trying to get me to use. But I mean, I might do it, but.
I mean, promotion is always good. And I mean, that's one of the hardest things about being a creator of any kind is just like self-promotion. Like some people are born with a gift for self-promotion, and then many others like myself, I have a hard time putting myself out there. So like I probably would be it would suit me well if I had a little bit more of that self-promotion in me, but...
So you're an artist who's not a very look at me kind of person?
Yeah. I make work most of the time. I make work for myself. So, and it's like about whatever I find interesting at the time. And I feel like I make interesting work because of that, because I'm not making it for anybody else. But then that also comes with the price of that. Like once I've made a work, oftentimes I'm like, okay, I've gotten what I needed out of this, and hasn't necessarily like made it out into the world yet before I'm on to the next thing.
So like you have like just a vault of things you haven't released to the public. That just sits there because it's for you.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few films I've made that like maybe I've shown in like limited screenings. Like I might have shown at one place, and then I'm like, I got what I needed out of this, and then it's, you know, maybe in 50 years when I have my retrospective.
Yeah, sounds like I heard about this thing where George Lucas is okay. So he hasn't directed a thing since Revenge of the Sith, right?
Yeah, that would.
And you could say he's in kind of like semi-retirement, because anything he does, he intends. He's just like, I'm going to make films, but they're like, I'm not going to release them. And he's going to like maybe screen them at Skywalker Ranch for his wife. And then in the end, they're like they're closet feature films that he's just going to make because he's like, yeah, I want to make stuff, but he doesn't want necessarily the whole world to see it.
Yeah, I had a professor in graduate school who always would talk about like a film doesn't really exist until an audience sits down to watch it. Mm-hmm. And I never knew if I agreed with him or not, because, you know, the film still exists whether or not people have seen it. But what does it mean? Is cinema like the object itself, like the film itself, or is it the experience? Is it this kind of ritual that we have of like coming together as a community to like sit down in a dark room and watch a movie? Is that what cinema is, or is the cinema like the actual film itself? And
well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I suppose in a very clinical perspective, you could say, yeah, sure, films exist, but there's lots. I bet you there are way more unreleased films than there are released films that still, sure, they exist, but not exactly in a public consciousness, not in a cultural zeitgeist. You know what I mean? Like there was that The Other Side of the Wind, that Orson Welles project that like never saw the light of day until last year. It took a long time to make in his life, and then he died. It just sat around and perhaps was in development for maybe in the last decade, and then it finally, by proxy through other people like Frank Marshall, one of the producers, and like Bob Murawski, the editor, who won an Academy Award for The Hurt Locker. You know, through all these other people who want to pay tribute to Orson Welles and finish what he started, to finally release a film, like 30 or 40 years after like he started working on it.
Yeah. I've got the documentary about that, my Netflix queue. I haven't watched it yet.
They'll love me when I'm dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and there's also like this really interesting phenomenon about like films that exist in people's imagination. Like, for example, they say we've got less than 30% of films from the silent film era like actually still exist. Most of them are lost now.
Yeah.
And so we know we have like descriptions of films. We might have still images of these films. We know who acted in them, but most of the people who have actually saw these films while they existed have passed away now. So like these are films that can only now exist in the imagination, which is really fascinating to me. I actually have a film that's just called Ideas for Films, which is it's made up of descriptions of films that like I had ideas for but never made. And they, you know, it's a very short film. It's a 5-minute film, but it like describes all these many films that don't actually exist, but then they sort of exist now that I've put them out into the world, because the viewer can imagine them however they want, and now the viewer owns the films. And I found that a really powerful concept. Like
I was expecting it to be like literally just shots of pages from a script. It's like, this is what these ideas are. You can imagine them however you want as you read these still images.
Yeah. So, I find the question of like what is cinema is a really intriguing it's a really intriguing concept, but it's also like this place that we can mine and kind of come up with new ideas for cinema from it if we really think about what is this medium that we're working in, and how can it be pushed beyond the traditional boundaries of Hollywood. We go to a megaplex, see this CGI dominated thing. I feel like there's so many other places that cinema can be pushed and has been pushed over the years that are really fascinating.
Like what?
Oh, I mean, I find projection really interesting, like films that are specifically made for like art museum settings are really fascinating to me, because art museums are not really places. I'm a film lover, and when they play films at art museums, like, you go into the little room with the curtain and the film's on a loop and you enter it like halfway through and you're like, you don't have the context. I hate that. I hate that that's, how films are being shown, because it was the creator's idea to, have a beginning, middle, end to this film, and the viewer kind of enters this in their own weird way. But there are plenty of filmmakers now who know the limits of this like looped room where the film is going to be entered at any point. The viewer's going to leave at any point. They're not going to necessarily stay for the whole thing. So like it's this set of limits for the filmmaker that they can work around and think of like, how can I create a film for this specific context?
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me.
They could make it short enough that it's just a GIF.
There was a filmmaker, I can't think of his name right now, who was in my graduate program before I entered the program, who he made GIFs on 16 millimeter film. So he created like a film loop that would just keep looping through the projector, and it was like a cat with sunglasses. So like, what does it mean to use this archaic technology to create like a modern day GIF? And yeah, that's an example of like a fun way of like playing with this concept. This is a work that really only works in person, because you have to see the mechanism. You see the projector running this strip of film over and over and over again. If it's digitized, you just see the GIF and you don't see really the mechanism behind it. So those are the things that fascinate me. And actually recently, for my thesis show, I was, creating films that were meant for installation context. And it's a completely different way of thinking than creating a film for a theater, because you've got to think about how, first of all, like, how do you intrigue the viewer enough that they'll sit down and watch your film? Because if you're they say that the average viewer in an art museum only spends less than 30 seconds looking at each piece. And then a film really requires you to spend more than 30 seconds with it to unpack what's going on. So how do you get the viewer, first of all, intrigue them enough from any point in your film to sit down and watch it? And also, how do you allow it to be a piece that if they only watch it for 30 seconds, they're still walking away with something? And that's a fun tightrope to try and figure out.
But a cat with sunglasses in the beginning, and
that it worked for me. That one, that piece, I watched that cat probably for a good 6 minutes. So
if it was meant to be a production of a GIF, that means it would have only lasted how long? The actual clip?
It was probably about 24 frames looped. Like the strip of film was longer than 24 frames, just to be long enough to go through the projector. But
and the projector itself was running at 24 frames.
Yes. So you're just watching like a second of. I don't think it was. I'm remembering it now. It was just like kind of sunglasses going on the cat, sunglasses going off the cat, and
oh, that's cool. May I ask where you're from?
Yeah. So I was born in Leadville, Colorado, but I grew up in Utah, actually.
Really?
Yeah, and then went to university in Colorado again. So. Colorado is the place I've lived the longest at this point. And I guess I'd say I'm from Colorado at this point.
All right. You would say your formative years were spent in Utah?
Yeah, many of them, yeah.
And where in Utah was it?
All over. My parents were divorced, and I lived between both of them. So
right.
I started living in Logan, Utah, but then lived kind of between them, and I lived in Loa, Utah, Richmond, Utah, Providence, Utah, Lyman. So a lot of small towns throughout Utah.
And how was that? Did it feel like you were in the middle of nowhere because it's like small town Utah, or?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's definitely a different culture. It's a very small town mentality in terms of like everybody knows everybody. And that has its benefits in terms of it's a very, like, growing up in Utah, in Logan, it was like a very safe place, and they had a free public bus that went everywhere. So as a kid, my parents didn't worry about me. Like, I got on the bus and went to the comic book store every day, and then like rode the bus home. And because it was a safe place, I had that freedom. Like, even as like at 8 years old, I was riding the bus around town. But then also just like it being a small town, and if you're not necessarily, Utah's got like a very predominant culture. It's very
Mormon,
very Mormon, and not being Mormon, like I never really felt like I was a part of it in certain ways. Like, so that was hard. People were very friendly to me, but there was also just always a certain level of like,
man, he's not Mormon.
Exactly. Yeah. Of like, I fit in, but only so much because, especially as a child, the Utah's changed a lot when like, my dad still lives there. And when I go back and visit, I'm always surprised because it changed so drastically. But when I was a kid, like, I think it was like 95% LDS, which is Mormon. Yeah.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So,
and you say you went to the comic book store a lot.
Yeah.
What kind of comics were you into?
I grew up on Marvel comics.
Okay.
So my favorite were the X-Men and Spider-Man.
Cool.
Yeah. I was a huge X-Men fan as a kid. And actually how I got into art is I would make my own X-Men comics. So after reading the comics, I would like learn how to draw all the characters and draw my own, and started making my own comic books. Like, I started creating my own comic book characters.
But the storylines were lacking? Or
unfortunately, I haven't seen those since I was a kid. I don't know what happened to them. So as a kid, I thought they were great storylines, but I haven't seen them as an adult, and at this point, I don't think they exist anymore.
I'm hoping one of them was like Wolverine goes to the comic book store.
That could be good. Who knows? And then, I started, like, when I was in 7th grade, I created my own team of superheroes, and they were kind of like making fun of superhero cliches. So like the main character was called Super Kid, and he was like a middle schooler who got superpowers from drinking like radioactive milk container from the cafeteria. And then like he inspired all the other kids in his school who didn't have superpowers. They wanted to become superheroes too, so they started to like make superpowers for themselves out of things that they had. So like one kid was like called Duct Tape Kid, and he just had the power of using duct tape really well. And so like this was kind of how I got into like learning how to draw, is writing these stories and making my own characters to create this world. Yeah.
And when did you get into doing animation? Was it at university?
Yeah, I actually got into animation pretty late in the game. My undergraduate degree was in printmaking, and printmaking, I loved it because it's very methodical and layered, and I'm very right-brained and left-brained, and printmaking for me was like the perfect combination of this because it allowed free expression in drawing, but then you also had to like break every image down into layers and like plan how you were going to do it. It allowed that very methodical approach to it. And so I was studying printmaking, which I fell into printmaking by accident. And then while I was doing printmaking, I took an animation class in undergrad. And it was kind of mind-blowing. I realized, oh, whoa, everything that I love doing is like part of this, because I also liked doing sound design. And I liked creating my own music. And so that's a part of animation. And also this like layering of printmaking also is involved in animation, but it's just the added element is now time. So it was kind of like a light bulb went off in my head, and I started doing like my own animations just for myself. But then when I went to graduate school, when I went to graduate school, I knew I wanted to learn something new. I didn't want to do printmaking again because I felt like I already knew a lot of printmaking, and I really want to learn new things. I'm always intrigued by learning new things. Filmmaking for me was like the logical next step. It was this thing that I was fascinated by that I really wanted to learn more about, and so that's what I went to grad school for.
What is the history of your exposure to film? Were you like one of those kids who didn't watch many movies and then you got exposed to like in a college film class or?
No, I grew up watching a lot of different types of films. My dad, when I was a kid, he would, living in a small town, we had a Blockbuster. When movies weren't getting rented anymore, they'd sell them for 99 cents a VHS. Mm-hmm. And so he'd go to Blockbuster once a month and get like $20 worth of movies and bring them home. And they were always like really weird, obscure things that I probably would never have been exposed to as a kid, or if not for this circumstance. But
like what?
Just a wide variety of things. Like there were, comedies from the 1970s that were like not necessarily very popular. Like they'd have I watched like Woody Allen films. I watched they had like Stanley Kubrick films on VHS. Okay. They had one of my favorite movies that I saw as a kid, and two of my favorite movies actually are like movies I saw as a kid that just like really left an impact on me that not many people really talk about. One of them is The Mosquito Coast, which is
okay. That was directed by Peter Weir.
Yeah,
and it stars Harrison Ford.
Yeah, I saw that as a small child, and that was left a real impact on me. And Fearless with Jeff Bridges from 1993. Have you seen that?
I have not.
It's a great film. It's got Rosie Perez and Isabella Rossellini in it. And these are movies that I don't think most kids would be watching at the age I was watching, but because we lived in a small town and there really wasn't all that much to do and my parents worked a lot, when they were gone, I just watched these VHSs. And so movies for me, I grew up just kind of watching whatever I could. And then when I was a teenager, I got a subscription to Netflix.
Okay.
And but this was back when Netflix was like a DVD service.
Yeah.
And I got like the 3 DVD plan and was having found a book that was like the directors you must see before you die. And so I started ordering DVDs at like 13 from all these different French directors and Italian directors and Kurosawa and so from a young age, I was really I had a voracious appetite for cinema.
Do you remember the first film you watched where you felt you were conscious enough to say man, this is a good movie. I like movies. Because the first time that ever happened to me, sure, growing up, I would pass by movies and yeah, that was a movie, or I know movies exist, but it wasn't very much until I might have been a preteen, maybe 12, 13, and I had seen bits and pieces of James Cameron's The Terminator from 1984, but it wasn't until just one night I happened to find it on TV. It was just starting. I sat and watched the whole thing, and I was like, man, that was a good movie. That was the first time I ever had a thought after watching a movie all the way through. Yeah, that was a good movie.
I don't know that I remember one specific movie as that, but there are definitely movies as a kid that I watched over and over again that I didn't realize until later left such an impact on me, like Gremlins. I loved that movie as a kid, and then I recently rewatched that as an adult, and I realized this is a really dark children's movie. But as a kid, I don't know. I was entranced. Yeah.
What about Gremlins 2, the new batch?
I liked Gremlins 2, but I didn't have it on VHS, so I only saw it once as a kid. So I haven't seen it since then, actually. But I do it still left a real big impression in my mind. I remember the end is in a shopping mall, and for having seen it at 11 years old, I remember surprisingly a lot about it.
And whenever I think about Gremlins 2, I just think about the comedy sketch by Key and Peele where it's like it's a production meeting about them trying to pitch ideas for the Gremlin sequel, and they're throwing out all this crap. They go to each person at the table. They throw out all this crap, and then you realize, wait, all that went in the movie. Yeah. Because the initial presentation is like, that's ridiculous. That's crazy. And then it's just Jordan Peele's character, like something ridiculous. It's in the movie. Throw it in. And then at the end you realize, yeah, all that did go into the movie. That was a crazy ass movie.
I'll have to check that out. I also have to now rewatch Gremlins too, because I didn't until this moment I didn't realize how much nostalgia I have for a movie I've seen once.
Do you think there was a particular movie, not particularly when you were young, but like one that really cemented you finally woke up as an appreciator of cinema?
I mean, I know like the movie that I probably saw once I started studying film that like made me realize like I am in the right place. I'm doing the right thing is The Mirror by Tarkovsky.
Okay.
It's kind of this.
What's his first name? Andrei Tarkovsky?
Yeah. It's a very kind of slow, methodical film about, it's like semi-autobiographical about the artist, like the director's childhood. But then there's these scenes in there that the cinematography is just amazing. Like there's one scene that just like when I saw it, I can just remember goosebumps on my arms, like, and feeling like I'm like, this is what I'm meant to be studying. This is where I'm meant to be. There's this scene with one of the main characters. She's kind of like standing out in a field and the wind is just blowing, and it's like the director is controlling the winds. You're just watching kind of the winds move through this field, and I have no idea how he got this shot. Like if he was just sitting there waiting for, hours and hours to get this, or if it was luck. But it's just kind of this beautiful moment, and the whole film is beautiful and kind of surreal. It's the type of film that you can watch over and over again, and every time you watch it, you get a different understanding of it because there's no real set meaning to the film. It's and I love cinema like that. I love when there's space for the audience to take away their own understandings of it. Like there's not necessarily so much of narrative cinema is like
very like spoon feeding the narrative to the audience.
Yeah, spoon feeding the narrative, but also like the emotional impact. Like this is how you're supposed to be feeling right now. Like the cinema can be so manipulative in. Which is why it's a great propaganda tool, is because, you play music at this point, you have someone look sad and all of a sudden the audience feels sad. And we know we're supposed to feel sad because, that's what we've been trained by cinema. Yeah. So I love it. So more and more as I've grown up with cinema, I'm more drawn to the cinema that leaves space for viewers to have their own feelings. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this. And that's like a really interesting place. I think that's a great place to be left with cinema. A lot of people hate that. Like you go to a film with no ending and you ever walk out of a theater after a movie kind of ends ambiguously and everyone's cursing like, what the hell was that? Like, why did I sit through that? And I love that moment. I don't
know how to feel.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know how to handle when cinema doesn't, when that spoon gets taken away and you're not really like you're left to kind of wade your own way through a film.
Yeah.
But I find that fascinating. I really love when directors trust the audience enough to have their own experience with a film.
They don't underestimate the audience. They don't assume that the audience is stupid and that they would have to again, spoon feed the message or the lack thereof to the audience.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the type of cinema, and that's the type that I'm more and more drawn to as an audience member, and it's also the type of cinema I'm more and more drawn to as a filmmaker myself. Is kind of creating ambiguous spaces. I saw a screening with the filmmaker Karen Yasinski, who's like an experimental animator and filmmaker based out of Pittsburgh, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But she makes kind of these short, surreal films that deal with. A lot of them take moments from other filmmakers. Like she has one film called Audition, which kind of takes moments from Cassavetes' Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and she reappropriates these moments from these scenes for her own use. At the screening, after the screening, which was this really powerful screening, and I had no idea what I was supposed to be feeling afterwards, but in like a really refreshing way. And she said her philosopher as a filmmaker was that it's not, as a filmmaker, it's not her job to tell the audience a story. It's to create an emotional landscape for the audience.
Okay.
And that was something that, like, I heard the right thing at the right time and has really inspired my own filmmaking since then. Is like, narrative doesn't need to be what's driving our films. What needs to be driving our films is like, what do we want the audience to experience, and like creating experiential cinema. And the experience doesn't need to be you be sad at this point in time. It can be just like creating a sense of wonder or mystery for an audience where they're not sure how to navigate it. They're not sure how to feel about it.
Yeah.
But then, you never remember, like, when you go and see a film that you hate because you don't understand it, you're not going to forget that film. You always remember those films that did that to you because they did something that you're not used to. And that's the kind of, that's something that's fascinating to me. Like, even if you don't dislike a film, if it's a film that like left you with a sense of mystery, you'll be thinking about that for days. You're not going to be thinking about Terminator 4 for days afterwards.
Well, I don't think anyone does.
Yeah.
But I have this kind of ambivalence towards films like that, where, I mean, as someone who grew up consuming like rather populist kind of quote unquote normal movies, where I just want to sit down for an hour and a half and like watch Woody Allen stumble through social interactions or something. There was just one movie that really perturbed me called Under the Skin.
One of my favorites.
That's it, from 2013.
Yes.
Directed by Jonathan Glazer.
Yes.
I remember hearing about it, and I saw it on a streaming service, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch this. And then a lot of it was, what the fuck? But after the film ended, I'm just sitting there feeling something. I didn't know what it was, but I was like, I was certain that I was unsettled. But then it was like, and part of it was like, what was that? I feel weird now. But also, so she was an alien. Or it's just, there were many questions popping into my head and weird feelings creeping around my skin. And it was like, I suppose that wasn't like there was a narrative. I wouldn't call it a story though. And I suppose Jonathan Glazer accomplished his mission of trying to get people thinking and, more importantly, to make them feel something, even if it wasn't a triumph or elation at the conclusion of what you would call the denouement of like a regular movie.
That film is probably one of my favorite films of the past 10 years. And I think that's a great example of a film that like does not necessarily, it's based on a book. I've read the book. I'd actually read the book many years before I saw the movie, but it doesn't necessarily even try and stick to the narrative of the book. Like it does in a general sense, but it doesn't try and tell you what's happening. It just shows you things, and it's up to you to piece them together however you will. Yeah. But the emotional landscape is so strong and surreal, and the cinematography and the visual aspects of the film, combined with like the score by I'm forgetting her name right now.
Mika Levy.
Yes.
She also did that movie Jackie with Natalie Portman as Jackie Kennedy.
Yes, and there's another movie that she just did the score for that I've seen the preview for, and it looks amazing. I'm very intrigued by it, but I think that film is a great example of a film that like even if you hate it, it will stick with you because it creates such a strong world in itself. It has its own unique logic to it that even if you don't understand it, even if you hated it, if you still are trying, like after you leave it, you're trying to figure it out because it gives you enough to. It doesn't leave the audience with nothing. It gives them enough that they can start to like put things together, and nobody may necessarily put the pieces together in the same way in their own head, but I love films like that.
Yeah, I never fully put the pieces together, but
and that's the film that you the more you watch, the more you appreciate. I've probably seen that film like 4 times now in different contexts. The most powerful of which I saw that as a double screening with Eraserhead.
Oh God,
talk about a screening that just like you leave completely perplexed. Just
that has to be like the most uncomfortable 4 hours of. Oh man, yeah. I remember I had the same kind of reaction when I first saw Eraserhead. That it was just a lot of what the hell is going on? But also like, what does it all mean?
Yeah,
I'm just. I guess with those kinds of films, like sure, I read up on them after having watched them and could parse something out. Like Eraserhead, was like an allegory about parenthood or something like that, or with Under the Skin, it's some kind of commentary on like men's objectification of women or something like that. But perhaps that realization is not strong enough to overcome my what the fuck.
Well, and it's funny with Under the Skin. I've heard people like make an argument that film's like an argument for vegetarianism about harvesting meat and like what we do in the meat industry. And I don't know that I agree with it. Like, I don't agree with that particular view of it, but I like that it's this film that leaves it open to so many different.
I didn't pick. How did anyone pick that up?
Well, she's going around harvesting humans as like for consumption.
Wait, hold on. Consumption. I never fully understood what exactly she was doing.
And I don't think the movie, like in the book, it's more explicit, but I don't think in the movie it really is as explicit. But yeah, it's.
Well, I mean, the things she does to those men, I could only interpret so much. I was just more like, okay, so you like break them into a sea of fractals? Is that what? And then they're gone? They're disintegrated? I thought that was what it meant.
There's this great scene in the film where there's this, it's kind of almost like an assembly line, and it's this just like meat slop going down into like this furnace, and it's comes out of nowhere. You probably don't remember it because it's like within the, it's a very short shot, but it's those type of things that kind of on repeated viewing as you start to parse more and more things from.
Yeah, like right now I don't remember that. I remember more the things like one of the guys like trying to get to Scarlett Johansson and like taking off his clothes, and then he just keeps sinking into the whatever that is, or like the guy who's like really deformed. Perhaps the frame that sticks in my mind the most is I think it is the guy who like keeps sinking into the sludge or whatever you would call it, and it like the shot hangs on for what seems like too long, to the point where it's like he gets like spaghettified or something, and there's this like little, it's almost like someone was tapping on the window that would have been in front of him, like just, and it goes. I remember I think I paused it at that moment. I was like, okay, I need to take a break because this is getting.
See, this is an example. The film, like, it left an impact. Like you weren't sure how to feel about it, but it's left some sort of mark in your.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love films that do that.
I wouldn't say, it's not that I like them, but it's also not that I hate them.
Yeah.
But I suppose that is the point, to not have me outright have an idea that, like, oh, that was really good. It is more of, to get me thinking, but I still want to grab onto, like, I don't know how to feel about this. I just know I was disturbed.
Yeah, there's and that's one thing I love about cinema is there's so much room for, like, we have an idea of what cinema is, but there's so many people who are making films on the outliers of cinema. and that are kind of pushing what it can be. And those are the places that I really find fascinating. That's the place I want to be. That's the place I want to explore. And like as a professor of film, it's also the kind of films that I want to share with students, is because I know, in filmmaking classes, I can show films that I know students have probably already seen in other contexts, in other classes, or it's come across in their own world. But if I can show a student something that I know, like, you probably will never come across this in any other context unless you're exposed to this in this context, that's something powerful that I can do as a professor. And even if students hate it, which I show a lot of films that I'm sure students leave hating, they still will remember those films. And I've done my job if they remember it, because I feel like as filmmakers or as artists of any kind, we can learn just as much from experiences we hate as we do from things we love. Because if we think about, like, if we start to really parse, like, what about that experience did I dislike, we start to learn about our own taste, our own values as makers, and that makes us stronger makers.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you're going to make a sequel to Under the Skin. Yeah.
No, I'll leave that to Jonathan Glazer. But
I forget. Is there are there other books related to that book?
I don't know if that author,
whoever it was, what was his name? I don't know.
I don't know if he ever wrote anything else. A quick Wikipedia search would tell us, but yeah.
But I think we gone on for a while. I gotta get to class soon.
Okay.
And, you probably have like meetings to go to or something.
Yeah, I do. But it's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
And it's weird to find someone else who it's weird to find someone who really enjoyed Under the Skin. But I almost had to find someone else who enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, or not in the traditional sense of enjoying it. But thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, of course.